This film has this one crucial moment where I got completely on board. Servus Freunde, my name is Jimmy Cage and Hellaro is a 2019 Gujarati language musical drama. It's a directorial debut by Abhishek Shah and it won the National Award for Best Feature Film. And I'm not just super happy that I have seen it because it's a great film, but also because it was the first Gujarati movie for me. It was actually recommended to me by Corbin and Rick from Our Stupid Reactions, so thanks guys. Hellaro, which translates to The Outburst, is a period piece that is set in a small remote village in Kutch in the 1970s. It depicts this very patriarchal community that is defined by very strict rules, blind beliefs and superstitions. People are worshipping the goddess and everything that happens is thought to be because of her, or everything that doesn't happen because it hasn't rained for 3 years. The idea that a community gets punished because of the sins of individuals is prevalent, and those old beliefs are of course instrumentalized to uphold the social structure and hierarchy. Women in that village aren't allowed to do much. They shouldn't ask questions and they especially can't take part in the traditional dance of Garba. This is something only intended for men. At least that's the rule. Women are basically prisoners and the only time they leave the settlement is on their daily chore to fetch water from a distant pond. Now, first I have to say that the setting of Hellaro, their locations and how they are filmed and framed are fantastic. The film takes place in the middle of the desert and this vast barren landscape is not only a sight to behold, but it also visualizes or juxtaposes the themes of freedom and confinement. It is open in every direction and yet people are prisoners of antiquated beliefs and power structures. Another interesting element that directly points to the film's topic of patriarchy is an old canon. It's not just a small altar to the goddess that marks the center of this village, but if I got that part correctly, the settlement was actually built around that ancient canon. On one hand, this ties their community and belief systems to the past, but on the other, it's also a very obvious phallic symbol, I think. This erect, upward-pointing canon. And as a matter of fact, there are several moments in the film in which the men are talking about having sex with their wives by referring to gun metaphors. But the central element and biggest symbol for freedom is certainly the garba. We are being introduced to this dance in the very beginning, and while it's also made clear immediately that women are prevented from participating and having fun, at first I also just enjoyed the great presentation of this art form. Set at night in this circle form, the contrast of the illuminated desert ground, the white and red costumes, with the pitch black of the sky and the simple but also great choreography. It's really captivating. But when you look closer, it's also a great way of depicting the conflict of the film without the need to use many words. The men outside, the joy in their faces, and in contrast, the women literally behind bars, kept inside in those little round clay huts. There are two major catalysts to get things in motion in the movie. The first is the arrival of the young woman Manjari, played by Shraddha Dangar, who gets married to one of the men. She's from the city, her education is at least a little bit better, and she starts to challenge certain things. But things really start to evolve, and this is the second catalyst, when the women on their way to fetch water stumble upon a worn-out stranger desperate for water. This is when everything changes, and this was also the moment for me where I really fell in love with this film. Up until that point, it was good, but it also ran the risk of being a little bit too, I don't want to say generic, but maybe a bit too familiar and simple. Hellaro isn't a full-fledged, realistic, parallel cinema drama, and while everything is shot really well, I was afraid it might turn out to be too predictable and run-of-the-mill. But again, this changed when the women met that stranger. Mulji, played by Jayesh, turns out to be a doli, a traditional drummer, and to show his gratitude for their help, he begins to play music, so that the women can do the garba. And this whole sequence, in which they figuratively break their shackles and dance freely in the middle of the desert, is just incredible. Again, in terms of how it is portrayed, with these great framings, long shots, wonderful choreography, and those really nice costumes, and more so, super vibrant colors, but then of course also because what that whole thing means for them and for the story of the movie. It reminded me a little bit of Lagan actually, with the desert setting and this one thing, in that case cricket, that becomes a symbol for the fight for freedom and independence. And of course I should also point out that the music of Hellaro is really contagious, and I'm super happy that there were subtitles for the songs. By the way, you can watch the movie on MX Player, you just need to live in India or use a VPN and pretend to live in India. The music was composed by Mehul Surti and the lyrics written by Soumya Joshi. He is also credited for the dialogues, with Abhishek Shah and Pratik Gupta for the screenplay. And while I'm of course dependent on the subtitles, it seemed as if many dialogues are quite poignant. There was, for example, this one line that asked that at least the hollowness of the doll might give some joy to the hollowness of their heart and soul. I don't remember the exact words, but I liked that very much. At the same time, many dialogues, because of their very direct nature, prevented a more realistic feeling. But this is actually not really meant as a negative, because with its positioning between parallel cinema and more popular uplifting filmmaking, I think Hellaro could as well be described as a little bit like a fairy tale. It is very much focused on its themes and the power of its symbols, and not so much on the individuals. More in the vein of a folk tale. There was this village many years ago in which women weren't allowed to participate in the Garba, but then, one day, and so on. We definitely get to know a little bit about certain characters, but it is very much an ensemble piece, and while there are some layers and characters that move a little bit between the sides, it's still a rather black and white portrayal of the oppressors and the oppressed. Yet it's not coming across as just a message movie, because the presentation is that vibrant and fresh, and because the quality of all elements is very high. All the performances are good, and the movie has a very nice flow to it, with the musical numbers being the definite highlights. And while the overall direction and message are very clear and most characters portrayed in a rather simple way, there are still many little things to pick up and to enjoy. And all those also add to the film's still quite real and authentic feeling, even if it's told in a slightly fairy tale kind of way. The way everything is put in context, for example, the emergency that has been declared by Indira Gandhi, which gets mocked by the men in the village because they see it as a clear result of what happens when you put a woman in charge, or little dialogue bits that other villages have allowed the women to dance as well, or how superstitions and belief systems are used to keep certain people down, and without noticing it, there are also those little joyful superstitions like saying a newborn baby will be lucky in his life because it was born when the sun was rising. There's also the character of Baglo, played by Maulik Nayak. Without directly communicating with him, he still acts like a secret ally for the women, because he's more open-minded and sometimes persuading the men in the village to do certain things differently, all while making them believe it was their idea in the first place. If there's one minor thing that bothered me a little bit while watching, it is a small scene that involves a fire in one of those little clay huts. It is a very tragic scene, but I just couldn't fully invest because I thought it was just highly unlikely that the situation would end that way, with a fire in that little place. That was just a bit too much for me, but maybe when you see it more in line with the whole fairy tale angle, it works much better. Overall, Hellaro is a terrific film, and even though it depicts a small village in the 70s, its message is still of utmost importance and it's still very empowering, and it also shows the very uplifting idea that time will move on and those old superstitions and cruel power structures that rely very much on such beliefs will slowly but surely make way for a more progressive, fair and equal life for everybody. And I think especially in 2020, that's something that we should really strive for, and Hellaro gives me hope. So in German I'd say, Hellaro ist ein richtig starker Film. Ein tolles Setting, eine wichtige Botschaft und einfach großartig präsentiert. Durch die Kraft der Musik und des Tanzes zu Freiheit und Selbstbestimmung. I give Hellaro 8 out of 10. It's more like 8.3, but I don't do that. Alright, that's it like always. Comment below and let me know what you think about Hellaro. And also let me know what is your favorite Gujarati language movie. You can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Letterboxd, and also on Patreon, simply at the Jimmy Cage. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give me a thumbs up, share, subscribe, whatever you like. And make sure you hit that bell for all I have to tell.